Hi. So earlier today, I found myself at the No King's Day protests in the area in Colorado where I live. And I say I found myself there because I actually had no intentions of going there. But my 8-year-old daughter had decided that she was going to go with or without me. And obviously, I couldn't let an 8-year-old go by herself. And so I went along as well. And when I went, I learned a few things about myself. One, I have to be honest that since my daughter and I had the incident last week where the person had called us niggas, um, I have been up and down with my feelings about it. Obviously, it's not awesome. And if you have read some of my other things or follow me in some other places, you know I wrote a song about it, which was my way of taking the energy and transmuting it and turning it into something else. Um, And that's typically what I do. I grew up with being called that many times. I also grew up marching and going to some protests and things. And I've taken my kids to them in the past. But ever since Scredo 2.0, I, like many other Black people, said, you know what? I'm going to sit this one out because I know what it's like to educate or try to educate folks. And here we are finding ourselves like it's back in the 1960s or something like that. So it's discouraging to see. And I didn't want to put my children in position where, hi, Susan, I didn't want to put my children in a position um, where they were going to feel excessively vulnerable, especially what happened with my daughter now last week. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to subject my kids to anything needlessly. And plus, I woke up from a nightmare related to one of my daughters. So I'm trying to keep my kids safe right now. But my kid wanted to go to the No Kings Day protest. And so as a father, I felt a little bit torn, but I didn't want to deny her that experience because she's seen herself in pictures at other protests. And she said, I just don't remember being there. I wasn't conscious, is how she says it. So she's like, now that I'm conscious, I want to go to this protest. So we went, and there was an element of it that I will have to say is some kind of healing balm, because I was frustrated last week with the racist incident that happened to my other daughter, and I've actually been pretty sad. Oh, that's good. I'm glad that it was fantastic, Susan. I was pretty sad a couple days ago. Actually, to be honest with you, I started crying when I was looking at a picture of my daughter, my oldest daughter, who was called the N word with me last week. Um, I saw a picture of her, and even though she's almost 18, I felt this fatherly feeling like she's still my baby, and that brought me to tears because I was just frustrated because I've raised my daughters to be strong and to be able to articulate themselves and be assertive when they need to and all of these things. And I know that I hoped I didn't have that misguided hope that some people had where they thought racism was over. That's silly. I didn't think that, but I did think that we might have come to a place where people were um, striving to be more present in how they engage with people across differences. But when the person yelled N word to us last week, I was like, yeah, you know what? A lot of people are going backwards, bro. And I don't want that for my kids, but I can't stop it. Right. And so my father protective energy kicked in, and I have been trying to figure out how to manage that energy because right now I haven't been thrilled. But when we went to the protest, because I used to be a pastor for 6.5 years locally, I saw a lot of people from the church that I used to serve at this protest, and they're all white people, you know, and because I served the church was everybody's white. So when I saw them out there, it actually brought something up for me that was kind of a healing thing because when I resigned from the church, it was after George Floyd and all the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. And I was basically exhausted from being an, like one of the only Black people in the church. The ratio was a little too much for me to bear. And while people were catching themselves up with education about racism and all these things, I just couldn't handle that pressure at that time. It was a little too much for me. and other things that were seemingly too pressured. And I also felt like the Christian church was a big part of the problem. And so I felt like I needed to get out of there and try to help people actually practice it. So I went into bridging divides and bringing people together across differences and depolarization, all sorts of things like that. Spent a few years in that only to find that that area has challenges as well that I won't get into. But going to the protest today actually um, did make me feel a little bit lighter, especially with people in the balloon animals or whatever it is that they're called. That was funny. And there was a lot of funny signs. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot of funny signs and other things. And one of the things that I do to kind of keep myself up is I also do stand up comedy. And so my brain started working with that. But also, it's just, um, for a long time, I felt because I came from the religious and political right and then swung all the way over to the religious and political left, I've seen a lot of both sides. And uh, it feels like a lot of what is happening in America and across the world is white people versus other white people. And then the rest of us get stuck in the middle somehow, and we sometimes carry the brunt of that tension. Not always, I guess, depending on the group, but from my perspective, it feels that way. And so it actually feels kind of cool to see white people challenging other white people, um, and being able to. I hope that that challenge extends to their home life, where in their family life, because I think that a lot of what has been pervasive in our society is because people don't deal with some of these issues at home. They don't wrestle with their families or argue with their families about some of these things that are having these ripple effects all throughout the community. And there's a lot of things, a lot of harm that's coming to a lot of people right now. And once I talked to somebody yesterday who's on SNAP, and they told me that they're about to lose their SNAP benefits and they're a single parent. It's going to devastate them. And a lot of people are losing their insurance. I grew up without insurance, and I'm prepared to not have insurance now. And I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe pray our way through it or something. But a lot of people, it could be life or death. So these kinds of things, the protests and the having the discussions and challenging people, it all matters. And we really have to kind of put in more work. I'm glad I went, even though it wasn't my intention to go. And I'm glad to have built the memory with my daughter of being there, because as she's growing and developing and reflecting on the world as it's emerging, she's going to have this as a frame of reference where people that she knew, because some of the people she knew from the church, she saw them there and some of her friends were there. So even though I can't, make the world a better place for her, at least she can have some sense of there are people that do care. And I hope that that care extends beyond being out on the corner and celebrating in some kind of way of the togetherness. Because going to protests is honestly, it's like a religious experience. And I know that as a pastor. And so I know that it's a religious experience, but I also know that humans are subject to this thing called hedonic adaptation. And hedonic adaptation, um, oh yeah, Susan said it was mostly white people in a predominantly black city. Heard 200,000. It's time for us white folk to do the work. You know what? Thanks, Susan. If I could give you a high five from here, I would. Consider it a high five. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. But so I'll just go back to the hedonic adaptation thing. So hedonic adaptation, or sometimes called the hedonic treadmill, is this state where we have a baseline for our emotions. So if we get excited and feel a lot of feelings, like if you go to a conference and you're like, man, this conference changed my life. I'm gonna go home and like build a better world. And then like 3 days later, you don't give a shit. I mean, a crap. My daughter is in earshot. Don't give a crap. That is the hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation. And that happens to a lot of us. And the only way to extend yourself beyond the limits of your hedonic adaptation is to put yourself in a little bit more of an extreme situation where there's definitely some physiological challenges that come with making that shift, so that you build a new baseline. Another thing that you could kind of use as a frame of reference is this. Hi, Malik. Thanks for joining. So I was just talking about the hedonic treadmill and the emotional baseline that folks have. That sometimes when we have these religious type of experiences, of like going to protests and things like that, and we feel like we're going to change the world. And we feel all great, and then a few days it wears off. That's where I'm at. And then there's this other thing that is called can't think of the term of it right now, but basically whenever there's a thesis of how a person or a system functions, there's always this antithesis. And when the antithesis and the thesis run into each other, that creates uh, a kind of a synthesis after. There's a crisis first, and then there's the synthesis. That's actually called the dialectical process. So dialectical process, that's what it was. The dialectical process is when there's the thesis and the antithesis encounter each other, it causes a crisis, and out of that crisis emerges a new synthesis that has the more strength, and it's, I would say, the best of both worlds. And it becomes a new baseline, or the new kind of thesis that system operates at, and then the process kind of continues to repeat itself. And the same thing happens in individuals. So we have to have these kinds of encounters in order to grow and to expand beyond our hedonic adaptation. And a lot of us don't do that. We get the feelings, and then once those feelings drop off, we just kind of go back to business as usual. And that's something that I've experienced many times, where I've been around people and they'll be like, "I'm so excited," and then a couple days later they don't have it. And it's kind of like in breed disappointment. And then what happens with a lot of folks is, if they don't live into the promises that they make of themselves, they start feeling lesser and shamed unconsciously, and it makes them do less and less work. And so a way of getting around that is to do really incremental, smaller steps of change. So when you feel that huge thing of, I'm going to change the world, you got to break it down into incremental steps and be like, what's the first thing I'm going to do? What's the first step I can take? But a smaller step that you can build on. Because if you don't do that, then we're just going to fall right back into the baseline. And that's really how, at least from my perspective, how we found ourselves, in 2025, functioning like we're about 3 years past 1963. It's really sad, but it is to be expected if we don't do the work in a conscious and intentional way that actually puts us through a level of stress that then raises our baseline. And so my invitation to folks that I engage with is to be mindful of these things, to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling these feelings. I know that the next step is I'm going to hit my baseline and I'm going to fall backwards. And so if you're already prepared for that, and you kind of set yourself up for what you're going to do when you hit that point, and you get like a partner or some person that holds you to that higher standard until that higher standard becomes your new normal. If we don't do that, we'll end up feeling not so great afterwards. And many of us, I don't know if any of you who are listening right now know that experience, but most humans do know that experience. And so we have to figure out how to move ourselves beyond that baseline. And I've put myself through a lot of things to move myself beyond those baselines. And I know how difficult it is. A lot of times it does end up causing physiological changes when we make these baseline like expansions. Kind of like if you go to the gym, it's gonna hurt if your muscles are growing. That's just gonna happen. You're gonna lose your breath, and your heart rate's gonna accelerate if you're pushing yourself. But then as you continue to do those things, you build your capacity, and that's what this is about. It's about building capacity. So I hope that I'm assuming that for most of the people who went to No King's Day, it's just going to be that celebratory experience, and to get that little bit of emotional kind of bulimia, where they get some of the feelings out of themselves. But for some of you, I think I'm hoping you, Susan, since I know you were from here, I could know that you were at the one in DC. I hope that you and other people that you may be connected to who participated do try to create some kind of accountability process, some kind of marker for growth, some way of managing and holding that tension, and some mindfulness that says, hey, I know this may come down, but we're going to keep this going. Because until we get to a place where we're able to do that, we're just going to, it's going to, like, next thing you know, 2050, and you're like, man, 2050 is just like 2025, and 2025 was just like 1965. We don't want that crap, you know? So if there's any way I could be of service in, describing some exercise or something like that, I can write about it. If people ask me or reach out to me, but there's some things you can do. I mean, some things are very simple. Like one of the things I'll do is if I get an idea in my head and I find myself not wanting to move for an idea, I'll push myself and make myself do 25 push-ups. Like that doesn't seem like anything. But if I can feel myself in resistance, then I make myself do something to tell my ego, you're not in charge of the me. Like, if that makes any sense, that I can push myself. Like, and I don't know if I posted it up here or not, but when my daughter and I would call in word last week, actually I did in my most recent video post, I put a link to the song that I wrote after my daughter and I would call niggers. Um, and I did that because I needed to transform that energy. I needed to transmute it and not let myself just be in anger about somebody verbally kind of abusing my family. So I was able to convert that into a song to express my anger. And the song's called Now I'm Going to Get Angry, but I wrote it in a happy sound for different artistic reasons. But I did that to push myself because I felt like doing it. Then I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do it. And then I pushed myself and made myself do it because what happens is I created a sense of accountability within myself for creating the song and putting it out there. And so now that I've done that, I am forced to, like, if I kept it to myself, I could have hidden anything that was going on inside of myself. But because I put it out there, I'm accountable for what I put out there. So it holds myself to a higher standard. And there's this practice I have that I call from rage to responsibility. It's something I developed a bunch of years ago when I was like really angry. And I told myself, okay, this rage I feel is an energy. That energy has been gifted to me. I have responsibility for all the energy that's gifted to me and what I do with that energy. And so I created a practice of converting rage. And I tried to pass that on to my, yeah, I mean, it's true. I feel like no one should have to go through that. And I mean, I'm gonna say something in this video that I was writing about on my post I'm working on right now. But I got to a point, and some people who've ever listened to me before, they know when I was a kid, I got to a point where I was like, there's no way I'm making it to an adult, given all the things I had experienced prior to becoming an adult. I didn't expect to live to be an adult. And so I had to contextualize my life and in a way that I could live from the maximum responsibility because I was also carrying this Republican thing that I was raised with about lifting yourself by your bootstraps that I was given to me from my family on my mom's side. So I was carrying that tension. And so since I was like trying to make the most of that energy, I basically told myself the biggest goal I could have is to not have my grandmother lie at my funeral. So I tried to be the best person I could be so that when I got killed, she wouldn't have to lie at my funeral. That was my only goal in life until I was 18. And I was like, what? I'm still alive. I better do something. But up to that point, that was my goal in life. And I used to walk outside. And before I walked outside, I would imagine that there were snipers all around and somebody was waiting to take me out at any moment. And I just my game that I played with myself mentally was to do whatever I was doing with my back straight. Because I don't remember how Martin Luther King said it, but it's something like someone can't ride your back if you don't bend it, something to that degree. And so I told myself, I'm just going to keep my head up, keep my back straight. And when they kill me, I will do it with an honorable death. That was my goal in life. Now I'm 50. So it's a lot of things that if I knew I was going to be alive this long, I would have done different. but that's how I lived for a long time. And I mean, really until I had kids, kept that mindset. And then I started wanting to stay alive because I had my children and this protector energy that I have made me want to live in a way that I can model for them and to kind of shield them from some of the stuff that I experienced. I've not been able to shield them from everything, obviously, but I try to shield them from some while also teaching them and being mindful and all those other things. But there's a lot of us who deal with that energy on a day-to-day basis in different ways. Sometimes we deal with it in ways that make us hate ourselves and hate our lives and kind of self-destruct. And people do that from all types of groups. but they do it for different reasons. And I did that for a long time. So that's a little bit of a caveat. So I've been doing this work for a long time, this rage to responsibility work, because I felt like it was, I don't know the best way to describe it. I have a comedy set where I explain it in comedy. I'm not going to do a comedy show here because you need to feed off of laughs and y'all aren't going to laugh. I won't hear you laugh. So I'm not going to do comedy. I'll just say that um, there is to me a responsibility that I have for the energy that comes to me, no matter what that energy is. And some of it comes to be forgiven. Some of it comes to be transmuted. Some of it comes to be channeled in a kind of surgical way for change and for healing in the society and the community. And I'm trying my best to live from that, to live from the highest consciousness that I can achieve in this lifetime, not for me, but because eventually I'm going to be dead and no one's going to remember I was here anyway, but for whoever's here after me. And so that's basically how I'm trying to channel this energy. And life has just kind of set me up in a way to be mindful of these things. And so I'm grateful for that. And at the same time, there's some challenges there. So anyway, I kind of went a little bit further than I intended to when reflecting on the No King's Day protest. What I will say is that I'm glad I went. I'm glad I went with my daughter. I'm glad we have this memory together and that we can reflect together. And I'm glad that I saw some white people, a lot of white people out there being like, no to this, because the truth of the matter is that the system, and a lot of folks know this, it was made to benefit white people. And so when I'm in Colorado, Susan. So basically, and there's a lot of white people here. It's not like DC. I used to live in the DC metro area. Well, basically Maryland, because I used to work in the intelligence community actually, and that was one disheartening career path. Let me tell you, after doing that, I felt like, oh God, and I had to like change and become a pastor just to kind of clear my soul from the things that I learned. Mm-mm-mm. That's why a lot of people wonder why I like changed my career so drastically, but it was because the other career field was making me a paranoid person that couldn't trust anybody, and I did not like that feeling. Oh, that's awesome! Excuse me, your husband's a retired Air Force general. Yeah, I was in the Air Force also. So, but I got out. I thought I was going to stay in 20 and da 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 da, but my soul was not inclined to that. So good on your husband for making it through. And I'm glad he retired and doesn't have to deal with what's happening right now. Whew. But at any rate, my prayer, I guess I'll say for folks is that wherever you are, if you engage in the protests or if you witness, oh man, Jag, as I'm having my own side conversation with Susan. Yeah, I'm glad that he's appalled. I have most of my military buddies are actually supporters of the person. I call him the Scredo. I don't call him anything but the Scredo. And I've actually, if you read any of my previous posts, I wrote about, I call him Scredo and I call his worshipers Scredians because they are not Christians, in my opinion, based off of the principles that Jesus taught. But that's a whole other story. Where I'm trying to kind of get to is this idea that whether you participated directly, indirectly, whether you stayed out of it or any of those things, we are in this together no matter what. And I think that the greatest responsibility we all have is for the energies that come to us and that we channel those. Um, oh no, Cheeto Jesus in our house. I'm not sure what that means, but I know I don't know what to say about that. but but basically I do think that each human soul has a responsibility for the energies that we that come to us, and that with consciousness we have an opportunity to be able to do something that oh yeah, he's definitely orange Jesus. I just didn't know if you were trying to say you worship Cheeto Jesus. I hope not. But in yeah, I just, like I said, I call him Scredo, and there's a whole thing about that if you want to go down that rabbit hole. I even made a hymn about the Scredo. called Bless You Screedo. It's kind of comical because I do stand up comedy in addition to this stuff. So sometimes I do some silly things. But anyway, um, oh man, thanks for so much engagement, Susan. You got me laughing. Alas, I will end with saying that I hope that with the energy that I've been gifted and that I'm distributing through this platform and some other things that I'm doing, that it serves folks and helps folks sharpen their resolve, be able to be mindful of what's occurring in their own consciousness by sharing things like hedonic adaptation and the dialectic process and some of the other things that keep us from living fully into the professions of our faith or the professions of our ideals or values. Because once people get to a place, once we take, I think the new frontier is going to be inner responsibility and congruence. People being aligned with their essence and being able to practice what they preach. I think that is the new frontier or the new evolution, the new journey is that it will become hopefully normalized that when people say one thing and do another thing, that they know that that's something they should be ashamed of and that they take steps to remedy that and understand, yeah, there's some kind of inherent hypocrisy in all systems because there's things that kind of keep us from living into our fullest ideals temporarily, but none of us should camp out there and make it the way that we choose to live. So my final invitation is stay in touch, follow, subscribe, share. And if you have recommendations of things you need, think I should talk about, please let me know. I love writing, and my career path lost its funding because it was in participatory democracy and bridging divides. And the current administration is not about that. And so I'm trying to still do the work the best I can with the resources that I do have. So thank you for whatever support you can offer, whether you're a paid or unpaid subscriber. It doesn't matter to me. You got to do what's real for you. But I appreciate your support. I appreciate you listening and sharing. And until next time.